Las bibliotecas académicas están asegurándose que sus colecciones de recursos representen perspectivas diversas y que todas las voces sean escuchadas, independientemente de la raza, género, orientación sexual, capacidades físicas o creencias. Estos esfuerzos aseguran una adecuada representación de los eventos históricos y una oportunidad para aprender de diversas perspectivas. Pero también pueden presentar un gran reto. Los presupuestos cada vez son menores y las bibliotecas tienen que hacer más con menos, lo que hace difícil crear colecciones y servicios inclusivos. Por ello, ProQuest está aquí para ayudarle. Descubra contenido validado, diverso e inclusivo. ProQuest trabaja con asesores, organizaciones y editoriales para ofrecerle contenido de diversidad, equidad e inclusión en videos, trabajos académicos, fuentes primarias, tesis y libros de compra título a título con atractivos descuentos de hasta el 25%. Encuentre soluciones asequibles para ampliar sus colecciones con ofertas especiales y recursos gratuitos. Nuestros expertos pueden analizar sus colecciones actuales para detectar brechas y sesgos. También podemos ayudarle a seleccionar contenido para atender a las necesidades específicas de sus usuarios, al tiempo que se optimiza su presupuesto al aprovechar nuestras promociones. Juntos podemos lograr que todas las voces sean escuchadas. Descubra cómo, ahora.
Con más de 80 años de experiencia ofreciendo un extraordinario abanico de recursos únicos, ProQuest, parte de Clarivate, empodera a investigadores y bibliotecarios de más de 400 instituciones de América Latina, con contenido validado para todas las disciplinas y en todos los formatos, servicios y herramientas innovadoras para la gestión de biblioteca.
Muy buenos días. A nombre del Instituto de Investigaciones Bibliotecológicas y de la Información de la Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México, les doy la más cordial bienvenida a este 8º día de actividades de la Fiesta del Libro IBI 2022 en su primera edición. Les recordamos a nuestra estimada audiencia, si por alguna razón se perdiera la transmisión, pueden reconectarse a través del enlace www.ibi.unam.mx/en vivo, disponible en el micrositio de la fiesta, acudir a nuestras redes sociales o bien únicamente refrescar la página actual. Nos acompañan en esta sesión para la presentación del libro titulado Brecha entre investigación y práctica bibliotecológica, cómo reducir la distancia, volumen 2, en su versión en inglés, al doctor Egbert Sánchez Vanderkast, investigador y secretario académico del Instituto de Investigaciones Bibliotecológicas y de la Información, a la doctora Krystyna Matusiak, de la Universidad de Egbert, y al doctor Witt, de la Universidad de Illinois, de IFLA Journal, ambos de los Estados Unidos. Adelante, bienvenidos.
Muy bienvenidos a todas y a todos a esta edición y la presentación del libro Brecha entre investigación y práctica bibliotecológica, cómo reducir la distancia, The Gap Between Research and Library Practice, How to Reduce the Distance. En esta mañana tenemos el agrado de presentar esta obra en 2 volúmenes, que es coordinada por la doctora Georgina Araceli Torres Vargas, y esta obra está dividida en los apartados investigación y práctica bibliotecológica, educación y conocimiento, perspectivas globales, perspectiva curricular, organización de la información, teoría, investigación e innovación. Es una obra que está compuesta por 14 capítulos en total. Y esta mañana tenemos el agrado de contar con distinguidos colegas como Krystyna, la doctora Krystyna Matusiak de la Universidad de Denver y el doctor Stephen Witt de la Universidad de Illinois Urbana-Champaign. Me voy a permitir hacer una breve introducción para que ustedes vayan teniendo un contexto. Desde los años 70, la investigación y la práctica bibliotecaria han seguido senderos separados. Sin embargo, los últimos 10 años emerge la preocupación de construir puentes entre estas dos islas. Lord, Ma y Lund han mostrado inquietudes por la temática. De la misma manera, los colegas Krystyna Matusiak y Stephen Witt. También hemos visto grupos de trabajos que se han conformado para discutir el cómo y también el para qué de posibles estructuras de este puente. Brecha entre investigación y práctica bibliotecológica, cómo reducir la distancia, the gap between research and library practice, how to reduce the distance, viene a demostrar no solo el cómo construir, sino también cómo pavimentar los caminos que conduce a este puente. Nuestra querida colega y amiga Krystyna Matusiak voy a dar su semblanza en inglés, es an associate professor in the Library and Information Science program at the University of Denver. She received her master in Library and Information Science and PhD from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. Prior to accepting her position at the University of Denver, she worked as a digital collection librarian and served as a digitation consultant. Her research interests include digital libraries, digitization of cultural heritage, visual information, information-seeking behavior, and research methods. She has been an active member of the IFLA Library Theory and Research Standing Committee for 10 years. She served as an LTR secretary, newsletter editor, and chair of the section. Krystyna, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for inviting me to talk about the chapter in the book, The Gap Between Research and Library Practice, How to Reduce the Gap, edited by Dr. Torres Vargas. My chapter discusses bridging the gap between LIS research and practice in light of two LTR projects that focus on the skills and competencies of library information professionals for the 21st century. I will talk about some ideas I discussed in the chapter, but I also want to kind of give up an update what we have accomplished in those projects since the chapter was written. So I'm going to share some slides, if that's okay. So the title of the chapter was Educating Library Professionals for Research and Data Intensive Environment. And that's really the focus of my talk. I will focus primarily on LIS education in research methods. But, the major theme of the book is really the gap between library information science research and library practice. Well, it's not a new topic. It is sort of an ongoing challenge. It has been discussed in our field for at least 20 years. And I think there are two sort of major areas of concern. The first one is really the lack of transfer from ideas from the LIS research studies into practice. So researchers conducting studies, writing paper with not a lot of cross-fertilization of ideas. This was discussed by one of our colleagues 20 years ago at the IFLA conference in Glasgow. So this sort of communication chasm between LIS research and practice. The second area of concern and challenge is really limited involvement of library practitioners in conducting original research. And that's really where I think the research projects of the library theory and research of the IFLA group has focused on. So some of the recommended strategies in literature focus sort of on encouraging more effective communication of research to practice. So sort of making more connections and collaboration between researchers and practitioners. The second is educating librarians as researchers. And there is quite a bit of research in this area. We are discussing improving practitioners' research skills. And, I bolded that point because that's really the primary area of LTR projects. We are focusing on examining, how future library practitioners are being educated in research methods. And then, hopefully this will lead to increased research productivity. I want to reflect briefly really on the importance of research methods, education in LIS in the current data-intensive environment. Some of that is really about applied areas in librarianship where library practitioners have to have skills to conduct assessment and evaluation, to, first of all, understand user needs and develop new services based on the evidence that is gathered through assessment and evaluation studies. The second one is evaluating and improving existing programs based on the data that we gather from users. And obviously you need to have research skills to conduct those assessment and evaluation studies. The other applied area is research in the area of user experience and usability, evaluating information systems from the user perspective, and that requires collecting both quantitative and qualitative data to improve the design of information systems and spaces. The third one, again, an applied area, is an emerging area of research data management, where library practitioners, data curators, data stewards, whatever we call them, are involved in supporting researchers in managing research data, meeting funders' requirements for developing data management plans, preparing metadata. So this is an area where library practitioners really need to understand how research data is generated. And that's where, again, education and research method is important. And then the role of librarians and researchers is sort of the heart of this discussion about bridging the gap between research and practice. So many argue that LIS practitioners are not only consumers of research, read research articles, just to inform the practice, but also library practitioners contribute actively to scholarship in our field. So there is this sort of, growing librarians' capacity for conducting research. And that requires expanding the skill set of researcher practitioners, especially that in, some countries, library practitioners are tenure faculty, and there is this expectation to conduct research in order to receive promotion. I think quite a bit of research is also documenting that we tend to, in our field, kind of focus on one method, that is survey. So really conducting more robust research requires diversifying approaches in research method when we conduct research. So, this will really lead to strengthening our, discipline and increasing research productivity. An effective strategy for bridging the gap between research and library practice and meeting the demands for the data-intensive requirements requires strengthening the research skills of library practitioners. And when in the LTR projects, when we're working, we're kind of using this research data cycle that comes from the UK Data Archive, sort of to visualize certain areas of expertise that are needed for library practitioners as researchers. And one area in the cycle is really in data processing, data analysis, and that's broadly speaking research design and methods. And that's really, where LIS education is focusing on preparing future practitioners in, first of all, understanding research, being able to evaluate, but also having active skills in designing research studies. The second area is sort of towards the end of the cycle, and that's where the skills in research data management are critical, is really, managing data, thinking about open access to data and data reuse. So these are the two areas that we kind of identified, and sort of this framework provided a good starting point for really talking about the research projects that we conducted. So library theory and research has been involved in those projects for several years now. The first project concentrated on the skills and competencies of practitioners who work in data curation or research data management. Those two terms are often used interchangeably. So the focus was on educational qualifications and competencies in data curation and research data management, and really on the roles and responsibilities those practitioners have. This was an international and interdisciplinary study. It sort of provided some inspiration for the second project, because the skills in research methods really emerge as an important area of competencies. As I mentioned before, library practitioners working in research data management really need to understand how data is produced. So they need to understand research methodology. And, that sort of inspired the second project. We really wanted to examine how future library professionals are prepared, to understand research, but also to conduct research, okay? So the focus was on educating library professionals in creating and processing and analyzing data. This was also an international study where we compared approaches and curricular models in teaching research methods in LIS programs in different countries. I'm going to focus on the second project because it's more recent, and since I wrote the chapter, we also collected some data. So I would also like to provide a little bit of an update on that. So it was an international study investigating library and information science education in research methods. The focus was on approaches to teaching research methods in LIS program, and then we wanted to compare educational models. The second goal, in addition to the sort of research investigation, was to collect case studies from different countries on practices in teaching research methods and in training library professionals. The project had two phases. We conducted a pilot study in the United States that focused on LIS programs accredited by the American Library Education, and it kind of helped us to refine the methodology for the study. And the second one was the international study that we kind of focus on LIS education globally. I want to highlight the team members who work with me on the project. So Debbie Schachter, who is the current LTR Secretary, Juana Bright, Monica Colon-Aguirre, and our colleague and the current LTR chair, Dr. Egbert Sánchez Vanderkast, and Premila Gamash from Sri Lanka. So this was an international and multilingual research team that helped us actually to recruit participants, but also conduct the study in English and in Spanish. So in terms of methodology, it was mixed method approach to data collection and analysis. We did an international survey that was in Qualtrics, but we also conducted interviews with LIS educators in multiple countries. And I would like to emphasize that those interviews were extremely valuable in understanding really the context, because, you know, LIS programs really vary from country to country. The survey was designed in 3 languages, so we got data in English, Spanish, and in French. And then those participants who expressed interest in participating in interviews were contacted, and we conducted 29 interviews. And again, the research team was involved in conducting those interviews. So we had a pretty good response to the survey. However, because of, I think, misunderstanding in the terminology and also the complexity of that questionnaire, you know, there was a significant portion of incomplete questionnaires. So some of them will be, you know, partially completed. So from the large pool, when we analyzed the data, only 99 were valid questionnaire responses. 40 countries were represented. And then I mentioned we conducted 29 interviews with participants from 19 different countries. And 10 interviews, thanks to Egbert and Monica, were conducted in Spanish. Here are the countries represented in the survey. There are some countries that were multiple, and you can see Mexico is very well represented thanks to recruitment of our colleagues in Mexico, which is wonderful. We do have a more varied picture really of LIS education in this area. And here are the countries that are represented in interviews. Again, because we were able to conduct those interviews in Spanish, we had really a good representation from Latin America. A little bit about the findings. So we are in the process of analyzing data, and this hopefully will be reported by summer. So the models of professional preparation, which have impact on really how people are educated in research methods, those models are quite varied. You know, in many countries, undergraduate degree is sort of the entry level for working as a professional in the field. But most actually programs on undergraduate level have some basic research method classes in social science research, which is, you know, wonderful. And then those programs that have both undergraduate and graduate education in a library information science will, you know, sometimes have a more advanced course, or sometimes those the training is kind of embedded in different type of courses. For example, user experience may have a significant module on research methods, or classes on information architecture, where again, students are analyzing how to collect data in understanding, how systems are designed. So that actually varies. And there are some programs that have both undergraduate and graduate education. As you can imagine, that in those models where we have both undergraduate and graduate, by the time students reach a master level, they may have 2 or 3 classes actually in research method, which is wonderful. The darker color on this chart indicates US when we are comparing data from the international study to our pilot. And the interesting thing is that in the United States, most of our programs are on the graduate level. So the students are studying library information science in the master's programs, but their undergraduate can be in a different subject area. So when they come to a master program, they really don't have much preparation in research methods, especially if they're coming from humanities background. So there is quite a, significant difference, in training depending on the models for overall LIS education. So in many programs, there is just one course. And again, you can see the darker color, that's mostly the United States programs, but there are some programs that will have two courses, like introductory and more advanced. And then there are even some programs that will have more than two courses in research methods. We were looking at really the types of the competencies that are that there is the area of focus in introductory courses as well as in the advanced. So as you can expect, the introductory course introduces research methods really to, for students to understand different types of research. But interestingly, quite a few of those courses also focus on designing a research project. So there is this introduction, how to design a research project, as well as evaluate, conduct a research project. The area where we are kind of interested in terms of supporting research data management, so assisting other researchers in conducting research, actually, I think there are fewer programs teaching that. But I think the really positive finding from this is that quite a few programs are actually focusing on training students how to design and conduct a research project. So let me conclude here, and again, this is very preliminary in terms of findings. We will be reporting this in a couple months after we complete the data analysis. But, despite the fact that this is an ongoing challenge, I think in the current sort of data intensive environment where library practitioners are, working in many areas that really have to do a lot with research, as well as, those who are expected to conduct research. I think that training in research method is really very important. And I think we need to discuss, how we prepare future professionals for this environment a little bit more. I think that, with the development of the internet and the importance of technology, there was a lot of discussion about, how much technology and IT we should teach in our programs. I think this is a time really now also to discuss the importance of teaching research methods and kind of moving beyond the single course. In my talk, I focus primarily, on, formal LIS education, but I think that training really goes beyond, there is so much only that we can teach actually in LIS programs. But I think we also need to think about stronger professional development in research through workshops, tutorials, sort of an ongoing professional education in research. And then finally, I want to touch on some of the areas that the library theory and research section is contributing to this discussion. First of all, it's through conducting those research projects sort of to understand the, global landscape in LIS education and kind of building a body of new comparative research, encouraging international collaboration, such as this one, discussing this topic on a broader international scene. And finally, I want to also mention that we are preparing an edited volume that will be published by the Greuter in the IFLA publication series, hopefully by the end of this year. And the title is Bridging Research and Library Practice, Global Perspectives on Education and Training, where there will be some chapters that kind of are built on the research we did on LIS education, but we also will have a section on sort of alternative models for expanding the skills in research, and voices from practitioners who conduct research, and one more section also on generally on research in this area. So hopefully we'll be able to share this with you by the end of this year. Thank you very much. And again, thank you very much for inviting me to talk about my chapter.
Thank you, Krystyna, for your wonderful talk and great insight you gave about educating library professionals for research and data intensive environment, and is a very, very global view of the ongoing research that we have at the moment about educating library professionals. And they gave us a great insight. And the theme of the ongoing discussion is very important, not only in the United States, but also in Mexico, where library profession is very, very keen on what is going on and what should be done about educating library professionals and to have a stronger research method. Okay, by this, I will invite our next speaker, Steve Witt, who is an associate professor at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, where he is director of the Center for Global Studies and head of the International and Area Studies Library. Steve is also editor of IFLA Journal. His research focus on the trajectory and impact of international developments in library and information science, placing global trends in librarianship and knowledge production in the context of a wider social and technological development. Steve, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you so much, Egbert, and thank you also to your colleagues for organizing today's session and bringing this volume to light this past year. It was about 2 years ago to this date that we were all meeting together in Mexico City on a conference of the same theme, and it's exciting to see you again and to be talking about these important topics as well. I'm going to be drawing on the chapter that I contributed to this volume, which was focused on taking a global studies approach to research and the issues in global scholarship that impact these gaps between research and practice. So I will share my screen right now and begin. Okay, you should all be able to see my screen now, I hope. So as we talk about the research gap, I've taken a look at my chapter once again and had the pleasure to reread many of the chapters in English that were in this volume and try to synthesize some of the gaps that Krystyna talks about and then some of the ways forward that we've all been discussing within various forums such as the IFLA. So in my chapter, I outline the ways in which libraries and the work of library professionals mirrors other globalized activities and professions and mirrors some of the impacts of globalization that we see in other areas, including things like global finance. And when we look at our field in our practice, it's very clear that our work is concrete. It's very local in its materiality. Yet at the same time, we operate within a vast global context of practice, of shared values of the profession, and then also all of the technical networks that bind us together, whether they're the information technologies we share, the library service platforms that are produced by global vendors, and the global publishing industry and global scholarship that fuels the works and collections that we have. So although our work is quite localized and in services of these specific communities of patrons, our practice is clearly tied to social goals that relate to global phenomenon and that have spread around the world. So for example, when you look at things like information literacy, this has been adopted at an almost universal level by the profession and implemented through intergovernmental groups such as UNESCO, and has an increasingly important role as societies around the world battle things like fake news and different forms of propaganda that influence the health and well-being and stability of societies. And there's an increasing role of libraries in that work. At the same time, we find IFLA quite engaged in the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and at local levels and national levels, libraries are attempting to contribute to the global coordination of those problems. And then also when we look at the profession from library science and information science perspectives, you see that there's been a strategic alignment to information sciences and the role of iSchools, for example. And that's really aligning our work to the economic globalization that prioritizes information and data as the mechanisms and tools that move capital and commodities, create efficiency, and also are the mediators of knowledge production and our understanding. So it's clear that we work within this very globalized profession and context, yet the research that comes out of the field doesn't often reflect this reality or try to think of it critically. So it begs the question of why does much of the research within our field fail to address the globality that we're embedded in, and why might it be necessary for us to adopt different frameworks that would help us understand this within the field and also help us understand our local context and ways in which to implement research better by being able to share knowledge at a broader global level. And as Peter Lohr's recent book from 2019 advocates, we need further theoretical underpinnings related to our international and global work. He notes that we need to be able to borrow from, link to other theories in social science disciplines. And we also have to make less haphazard, as he notes, choices of countries, societies, and cultures that we compare or draw upon in our work. So in a sense, we need better frameworks, better methodologies, but also better coordination of that work as a profession. So the chapter I wrote discusses to some extent some of the global epistemologies that could be used within LIS research to help us bridge some of these gaps. One is continuing to focus on local phenomena and local services, but trying to place them in a more global context, trying to explain how we're responding to global processes, global issues within the local context that we're working in, and also trying to aggregate some of the local or situational phenomena into a broader scale to help explain the global or the global processes that are impacting us within the field. And in terms of drawing upon other methodologies, there are quite a few within social sciences that we can look to. One, I think, that is important for us to consider is the work in education. Like library science is a very practically focused field, very much embedded in a local context, but simultaneously responding to and driven by broader global processes. And there's much work in comparative education and global education that could inform the types of methodologies that we use in the LIS field. As I note, comparative and global studies is a subfield that we should look to in our research in international and global librarianship. As we talk about the global studies approach, we're really discussing ways in which phenomena move beyond globalization and transnational, but also looking at different scales at which processes and activities are taking place. Whether or not we're looking at local institutions or national, regional, or global, we need to be conscious of that scale within the materiality of our work, and being conscious of when we choose a local unit of analysis for our research to ensure that we're contextualizing that local work with broader phenomena so that it can make connections to colleagues in other locations, but also understanding when the local phenomena may be better approached in a regional, national, or global scale. So as we talk about the need to bridge that gap within the global profession, it's clear that this volume also presents other perspectives and gaps within the research and practitioner relationship. And the chapters in this volume, Debbie Shatters, Andrea Wyman, and Pramila Gamage and Priyanka provide some interesting perspectives on this issue. And like Krystyna has noted, there are quite a few common conclusions that many have made. One, we need further education on research methods, and I applaud Krystyna's work on understanding how those methods are being taught internationally, and also understand. From that research, we can see that many of the models are really focused on creating better consumers of research among librarians, rather than creating librarians who can create knowledge. And that work to build that efficacy of research is quite important. The other issue that also Krystyna noted was the need for better communication of research to practitioners. Research shows that very often the practitioners are not able to apply the research from LIS very easily. So we need to be able to communicate more practical outcomes of that research. And the chapter from Pramila Gamaj on leadership training in public libraries makes it quite clear that librarians at all levels and in all locations are increasingly involved in serving as connectors and hubs for their communities as they're seeking to address problems, whether they're very locally derived problems or those that are related to global issues, like we find in involvement in the UN SDGs. And this all suggests a much greater need to engage in research and critical analysis of the work that we do so that we're able to fulfill these social missions. So the next gap that we see in these chapters is also related to integrating research into practice. So we need research into practice. Many practitioners report that they lack the skills necessary to do research, and there needs to be better collaboration amongst researchers. And then also we need policies in place that allow for mentorship and support so that practitioners can engage in this type of work. So as Krystyna mentioned, we're doing quite a bit of work within IFLA on these activities, and we will continue to produce more workshops. We hope to have a workshop in Ireland in 2022 as a post-conference satellite, and it will be focused again on IFLA. And my apologies, I guess my slides were not moving, though they were on my screen. So interesting.
Okay, Steve. Very interesting. Your presentation. I think that there's more. We have to do more discussion on to look for better frameworks, better methodology, as you have said, and a better coordination between not only in the US, between the English-speaking countries, but also in the Spanish-speaking and French and other kind of language-speaking countries. And also, it's very important that to go on, moving on in comparative approaches. And if we are looking at the local level, also we need to take in context the regional, and so we can move further to the global, to have a global process, and also to engage in better and critical analysis in at those professionals who is doing this kind of work in research. Otherwise, there are gaps. We have to look at other perspectives. And also, I recommend our audience to look for the chapter of Debbie Schechter from Langara College, from Andrea Wyman, from Edinburgh University of Pennsylvania, to also take a look at Kiwana Bright and Monica Colon-Aguirre. There are very, very interesting approaches of encouraging interdisciplinarity. It will be very nice to look and to understand how they are working between in India and the Oceania region in research and library practice, how they see all what is going on. I think this volume is a very great volume that compromise all what we are doing, and also there are many colleagues that have an ongoing discussion on and to try to reduce the distance between research and library practice. I think that if you have another observation, comments on the book, please go ahead. Krystyna or Steve?
Well, I just wanted to add that I think it's important to bring those different perspectives, and the fact that this is a bilingual volume, it's wonderful. I think we need really, perspectives from different regions and also in different languages, giving people an opportunity to write in their native language, I think is important, so we move kind of away from the dominance of English in scholarly communication. I think that's a wonderful initiative. So thank you very much for publishing it, and thank you very much to Dr. Vargas for editing it.
Thank you, Krystyna. Steve?
Yes, I concur with Krystyna, absolutely, that it's been a pleasure to be a part of this project, and that one of the significant barriers, I think, in publishing internationally is the language barrier, and we need to find ways to get beyond that, so that important work that people are doing can be shared more widely and isn't constrained just to a local position. So more ways in which we can have multilingual programs like this are important, and then also more processes, I think, within international publishing to provide access to disseminating research in ways that don't disadvantage people that don't happen to have
bibliotecología, que es de mucha importancia, porque aquí son tradiciones no solamente de diferentes universidades, como la Universidad de Langara, el Colegio de Langara, la Universidad de Edimburgo de Pensilvania, la Universidad de Denver, la Universidad de Illinois, la Universidad del Este de Carolina, el Instituto de Investigación Varieté de la India y de Sri Lanka, y la Universidad de La Habana, y naturalmente de colegas de la Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México. Aquí está plasmado en este libro diferentes tradiciones de investigación que nos puede ampliar la visión de cómo se realiza investigación bibliotecológica desde distintos ángulos, con perspectivas diferentes y con contextos que naturalmente nos van a ayudar a forjar una tradición y también la investigación bibliotecológica del siglo XXI. Muchas gracias, colegas Krystyna Matusiak y Stephen Witt, y nos vemos pronto en otra plataforma o en otro escenario. Cuídense mucho. Nice to have you here, Krystyna and Steve. Hope to see you soon in another platform or in another forum for discussion on research methods.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
A nombre del Instituto de Investigaciones Bibliotecológicas y de la Información, les extiendo un agradecimiento a los doctores Steven Witt, Krystyna Matusiak y al doctor John Egbert Sánchez Vanderkast por haber sido parte de esta Feria del Libro en su primera edición. Esperamos contar con ustedes de nueva cuenta en los siguientes años. Su participación es muy importante y valiosa. Continuamos festejando al libro y sigan las presentaciones que tendremos para ustedes el día de mañana, desde las 10 a.m. Este mismo canal de YouTube estaremos transmitiendo totalmente en vivo las presentaciones de los libros, el valor social de la información y las bibliotecas, acercamientos e indagaciones, que coordina el doctor Jaime Ríos Ortega, investigador del IBI. Y a las 12 del mediodía, Vulnerabilidad, Inclusión y Seguridad Digital en México, de la doctora Patricia Hernández Salazar, también investigadora de nuestro instituto. A continuación, se les comparte un atento anuncio de nuestro patrocinador, ProQuest.
Las bibliotecas académicas están asegurándose que sus colecciones de recursos representen perspectivas diversas y que todas las voces sean escuchadas, independientemente de la raza, género, orientación sexual, capacidades físicas o creencias. Estos esfuerzos aseguran una adecuada representación de los eventos históricos y una oportunidad para aprender de diversas perspectivas, pero también pueden presentar un gran reto. Los presupuestos cada vez son menores y las bibliotecas tienen que hacer más con menos, lo que hace difícil crear colecciones y servicios inclusivos. Por ello, ProQuest está aquí para ayudarle. Descubra contenido validado, diverso e inclusivo. ProQuest trabaja con asesores, organizaciones y editoriales para ofrecerle contenido de diversidad, equidad e inclusión en videos, trabajos académicos, fuentes primarias, tesis y libros de compra título a título con atractivos descuentos de hasta el 25%. Encuentre soluciones asequibles para ampliar sus colecciones con ofertas especiales y recursos gratuitos. Nuestros expertos pueden analizar sus colecciones actuales para detectar brechas y sesgos. También podemos ayudarle a seleccionar contenido para atender a las necesidades específicas de sus usuarios, al tiempo que se optimiza su presupuesto al aprovechar nuestras promociones. Juntos podemos lograr que todas las voces sean escuchadas. Descubra cómo, ahora.
Con más de 80 años de experiencia ofreciendo un extraordinario abanico de recursos únicos, ProQuest, parte de Clarivate, empodera a investigadores y bibliotecarios de más de 400 instituciones de América Latina, con contenido validado para todas las disciplinas y en todos los formatos, servicios y herramientas innovadoras para la gestión de biblioteca.